You are sitting on a wooden chair in the basement workshop of an empty cottage at Wisteria Cottage in the village of Greenburgh, Westchester County, New York, on the warm afternoon of June 3rd, 1928. You are 58 years old. You are 5 feet 5 inches tall. You weigh 130 pounds. You have, in the inside pocket of your dark woolen jacket, what you privately call your implements of hell. There are 3 of them. One is a small cleaver you have purchased 2 days earlier at a hardware store on Prospect Avenue. One is a butcher's knife you have wrapped in newspaper and tied with twine. One is a small-handled saw of the type used by carpenters for cutting fine wood. Upstairs in the cottage, sitting on the floor of the front parlor with a small straw doll on her lap, is a 10-year-old girl named Grace Budd. You have brought her here on a passenger train from Manhattan 4 hours ago, under the false pretense of attending a child's birthday party for your niece. There is no birthday party. There is no niece. There is only this cottage. There is only the basement. There is only what is in your inside pocket. In the next 9 hours she will be dead. Her body will be cooked in pieces on the cast-iron coal stove of this cottage over the next 9 days. By the morning of June 12th, 1928, the bones will be buried in the field behind the cottage. By 1934, you will have written a letter to her mother describing the meal in such precise detail that the New York Police Department will arrest you on the basis of the letter's stationery alone. By January 1936, you will be the oldest man in the modern history of the state of New York to die in the electric chair at Sing Sing. This is your life as Albert Hamilton Fish. You are born on May 19th, 1870, in the District of Columbia, in a small frame house on 12th Street near the Naval Observatory. Your father, Randall Fish, is a 43-year-old riverboat captain. He is also 75 years old when you are born. The math is correct. He has, by the time of your birth, married 3 different women, fathered children by all 3 of them, and lost 2 of them to typhoid. Your mother, his 4th wife, is 32 years younger than he is and is a domestic worker. He dies of a heart attack on the deck of the 6th Street ferry across the Potomac River when you are 5. Your mother, unable to support you alone, places you in St. John's Orphanage on K Street in the autumn of 1875. You live, for the next 9 years, at St. John's Orphanage. The orphanage is run by a Methodist minister, an aged matron, and a rotating staff of male disciplinarians who are paid by the orphanage to administer corporal punishment to the resident boys for any infraction of the orphanage's rules. The infractions include speaking at meals. The infractions include not memorizing the Lord's Prayer perfectly. The infractions include wetting the bed at night. The corporal punishment includes whippings on the bare buttocks with stripped birch rods. The whippings are public. The whippings are administered, you will tell a New York City psychiatrist in 1934, in front of the assembled male population of the orphanage, every Friday evening, after dinner, between the years 1876 and 1884. You are whipped, you will tell that psychiatrist, on average twice a month, for the entire 9 years of your residence. You begin, by the year 1880, to look forward to the whippings. You begin, by the year 1882, to ask the orphanage masters for them by name. You will tell that 1934 psychiatrist that the orphanage is the place where you first learned that pain and pleasure were the same thing. Your mother retrieves you from the orphanage in 1884. You are 14. You move with her to a small boarding house on the corner of 6th and B Streets in southeast Washington. You begin, in 1885, to apprentice as a house painter to a man named Hubbard, who has a small business in the same neighborhood. You finish the apprenticeship in 1888. You become, formally, a journeyman house painter. You will hold this trade with a license issued first by the District of Columbia and later by the State of New York for the next 46 years. You will paint, in those 46 years, a great many of the small frame houses, brick row houses, and tenement walk-ups of New York City. You will be, every employer who hires you will later tell investigators in 1934, a quiet, polite tradesman who showed up on time and who did good work. None of them will report a single complaint about you in those 46 years. You moved to New York City alone in 1890. You are 20. You sleep in flop houses on the Bowery for the first 6 months. You take, in 1891, a job painting the steel girders of the new elevated train trestles being built across the Bronx. You are. The foreman of that crew will tell investigators in 1934, the steadiest worker on the team and the only one of the 11 men who will, on Saturday afternoons after the shift, go home to a cheap rooming house and read the Bible by lamplight rather than drinking on the corner. You are, by 1893, working steady house painting jobs in Lower Manhattan and Hell's Kitchen. You begin, in the autumn of 1894, to attend a small Methodist church on West 38th Street. The pastor will, in 1934, tell the New York World that he had thought of you in those years as the gentlest soul in the congregation, and that he had, on the day after your arrest, sat down on the steps of his own church and wept. You marry, in 1898, a young woman named Anna Mary Hoffman. She is a 23-year-old daughter of a Brooklyn German immigrant family. You are 28. You will have, with her, 6 children between 1898 and 1916. The children will be named, in order, Albert, Anna, Gertrude, Eugene, John, and Henry. The marriage will last 20 years. In January 1917, your wife will leave you for a 35-year-old handyman named John Straube. She will take none of the children. She will leave you to raise them alone. You will, every employer who hires you will later confirm, raise them well. None of them will report any abuse of any kind by you against any of them. You will discipline them. You will tell that 1934 psychiatrist in the same manner you were disciplined at St. John's. You will paddle each of them. You will, on 3 separate occasions, ask each of them, when they are between the ages of 9 and 12, to paddle you in return. None of them, you will tell that psychiatrist, will refuse. You begin, in approximately 1910, when you are 40 years old, to nail small needles into your own pelvis. You insert them, you will tell that 1934 psychiatrist, fully into the flesh between your hip bone and your scrotum, where they remain. The x-rays of your pelvis taken at Sing Sing in October 1935 will show 29 separate sewing needles permanently embedded in the bone. Some of them will date, your warden will tell the press, from before 1915. You will, in addition, swallow on a regular basis a kind of compound. You mix yourself out of cotton wool, lighter fluid, and small pieces of wood. You will set the compound on fire and you will swallow it while it is still burning. You will tell that 1934 psychiatrist that you do this for the same reason you nail in the needles. The reason is that you wish, in the end of every day, to know exactly what your children at the orphanage felt during the Friday whippings. You wish to be one of them. You wish, you will say, to be your own punishment. You have, by the year 1924, begun to write letters in response to Lonely Heart's personal advertisements in the New York newspapers. The letters are signed under false names. The letters are addressed to women who have advertised themselves as widows or as single mothers seeking remarriage. The letters propose meetings. You meet, between 1924 and 1928, more than 70 women in coffee shops and small restaurants across Manhattan and Brooklyn under false names. You marry one of them in a Justice of the Peace civil ceremony in 1930 under the false name Frank Howard. You leave her 4 days later. The marriage is never recorded. You begin, in approximately 1922, to wander every Saturday afternoon through the small parks and tenement courtyards of the Lower East Side. You are looking, you will tell that 1934 psychiatrist, for what you call my Christmas children. You will tell him that the children should be small and quiet and unwatched. You will tell him that on most Saturdays you find none. You will tell him that on the Saturdays when you do find one, you sit, sometimes, on a bench across the courtyard for an hour or more before you approach the child. You will tell him that you, on most of those Saturdays, do not approach the child at all. You will tell him that you walk home in the evening with your hands shaking. You will tell him that it is, in those evenings, lying alone on the iron bed frame of your East Side rooming house, that you nail in the most needles. You begin, in approximately 1924, to commit kidnappings of small children. The first will be a boy named Francis McDonnell. He is 8 years old. He lives in Port Richmond, on the north shore of Staten Island. You take him from his front yard on the afternoon of July 14th, 1924. His body is found the same evening in a wooded lot half a mile away. You will be questioned in 1934 about the McDonnell killing. You will confess. The second will be a 4-year-old boy named Billy Gaffney from Brooklyn. You take him from his Brooklyn tenement hallway on the afternoon of February 11th, 1927. His body is never recovered. You will confess to that one, too. The third is Grace Budd. She is 10. She lives with her parents, Edward and Delia Budd, at 406 West 15th Street in Manhattan. Her older brother, Edward, 18, has placed a personal advertisement in the New York World newspaper of May 25th, 1928, seeking summer farm work in the country. You answer the advertisement. You arrive at the Budd apartment on the morning of May 28th, 1928, under the false name Frank Howard, claiming to be a Long Island farmer offering Edward $30 a week and full board for the summer. The Budd family invites you to lunch. You stay for the afternoon. You charm everyone in the apartment. You return on Sunday, June 3rd, 1928. You have brought a parcel of cottage cheese and farmer cheese as a small gift. You ask, at the end of lunch, whether you might bring Grace with you to a child's birthday party at your sister's house on Columbus Avenue. The Budds agree. You walk Grace out of the apartment at 1:15 in the afternoon, holding her by the hand. You take her to the New York Central Station. You ride the train to Greenburgh. You walk her to Wisteria Cottage. You will not see the Budds again for 6 years. The Grace Budd case will go cold within 2 weeks. The New York Police Department will, between 1928 and 1934, conduct what is, for that period, the largest missing child investigation in the city's history. They will interview more than 400 suspects. They will not find you. The break in the case will come on the afternoon of November 11th, 1934, when an envelope arrives at the Budd family apartment addressed to Mrs. Delia Budd in a careful, neat handwriting. The envelope is postmarked Manhattan. The letter inside is 6 pages long. The letter is written in detailed first-person prose. The letter describes, in graphic and unmistakable terms, the method by which the writer cut Grace's body into pieces, the duration over which he cooked the pieces in his stove, and the specific pleasure he took in the meal. The letter is signed in initials only. The letter ends with the sentence, "She did not suffer." The New York Police Department, 3 days later, removes from the envelope a small printed letterhead motif on the back flap. The motif is a private hexagonal logo of an organization called the New York Private Chauffeurs Benevolent Association on East 52nd Street. Detective William King of the NYPD Missing Persons Bureau visits the association on November 19th. He requests a list of every member who has ever taken stationery from the association's office. The list contains 112 names. King traces by hand every name on the list. The trace ends on the morning of December 13th, 1934, at a small rooming house at 200 East 52nd Street. The room is rented to a 64-year-old retired house painter calling himself Albert Fish. King knocks. You open the door. You smile at him. You step out of the rooming house with him without resisting. You ride with him in the back of a police sedan to the 21st Precinct. You confess that afternoon to the killing of Grace Budd. You confess in the next 48 hours to 2 other child killings. You hint to a senior detective at as many as 100 more. You are interviewed between December 13th, 1934 and February 1935 by Dr. Frederick Wertham, a 39-year-old German-born forensic psychiatrist of considerable national reputation. The interviews take place in a small concrete room of the Westchester County Jail in Eastview, New York. Wertham has been retained by your defense team. You speak to him for an aggregated total of more than 50 hours over those weeks. You answer every question he asks. You hold you will say nothing back. You describe to him your childhood at St. John's. You describe the needles. You describe the cotton wool fires you have swallowed. You describe Grace Budd in detail 3 separate times. You describe Billy Gaffney. You describe Francis McDonnell. You describe 2 more boys, whose names you cannot remember, and whose disappearances Wertham will be unable, despite a full year of effort, to match to any known case in the public record. You describe also 3 children you took to wooded areas of New Jersey and decided, at the last minute, to release. Wertham writes everything down. He will publish a book about you in 1949 titled The Show of Violence. He will write in that book that you were the most thoroughly self-aware sexual sadist he ever encountered in 32 years of practice. He will write that you knew, with complete clarity what you had done. He will write that this clarity was the reason you had to die. You are tried in March 1935 at the Westchester County Courthouse in White Plains. Your defense is insanity. The defense psychiatrist, Dr. Frederick Wertham, lists for the court 14 separate paraphilias you have admitted to during the pretrial interviews, including the needle insertions, the cotton wool burning, the consumption of human excreta, and the practice of self-flagellation with a nailed paddle. The jury hears Wertham's testimony. The jury hears your own testimony in which you describe Grace Budd's death in flat, unemotional sentences. The jury convicts you in less than an hour. The jury votes for the death penalty. You are sentenced to die at Sing Sing. You are walked, on the morning of January 16th, 1936, from your cell in Sing Sing's death house to the electric chair at 6 minutes past 11 at night. You are 65 years old. You are the oldest man, at this hour, ever to be executed by the state of New York. The first jolt of electricity is administered. The technician on duty will tell the press, the next morning, that the first jolt did not appear to take, and that he had attributed the failure to interference from the metal needles permanently embedded in your pelvis. The second jolt is administered. You die at 11:09. Your last recorded words, spoken to your defense attorney in your cell 90 minutes earlier, are a statement that you are looking forward to the experience of the chair as the only sensation in your 65 years of life, that you have not yet personally tried. This was your life as Albert Fish.